All right, so let's look at HTML in a kind of overview way first before we start diving into the details. So after this presentation, you'll understand the ways in which HTML is used. You'll appreciate the single page application idea of using HTML, and you'll be able to differentiate between HTML and another language called SVG. So HTML, basically the main language for building web pages. It's been around for quite a long time, 25, 30 years, since the 1990s. Latest version is HTML5. This complete series of videos looks at HTML5. So before we start looking at HTML code, we need to just understand how it gets used. This is the most common way it gets used. Browser sends a request to the server and asks for a web page, okay, such as index.html. Okay, server sends the complete web page back to the browser. Browser receives the complete web page and displays it appropriately. Okay, so that's been going on for like 30 years. That's the basic model, and it still goes on today millions of times a day. However, things have got a bit more complex in the last 10 or so years. Let's look at another model, which is single page application, SPA. So now things are a little bit more complex. Browser sends a request to the server asking for a small piece of data. It doesn't ask for an entire web page, it just asks for a small piece of data. For example, let's say you have an application for buying and selling stock information, stock prices, things like that. So you want to buy some stock. You send a little piece of information, you send a request to the server, I want to buy some stock. The server responds with a small piece of data, and that comes back to the browser. It comes back to the same page, single page application. So you don't get like a flash and a new web page. You don't get that at all. Most of it stays the same. Just a little piece changes. So a little piece gets sent back to the browser, and then in here, usually some JavaScript will receive the little piece of information and then update it. Perhaps it is, what is the price of some stock market information? Okay, it just updates that little price shown in the web page. So this is the single page application idea, requesting for a little piece of data, receiving a little piece of data, changing a small piece of the web page. That is now very, very common. Now, when we say web page, perhaps you think only of HTML. So I'd like to just give a quick example of an alternative. So instead of just doing everything in HTML, you could choose SVG. Okay, it's another way of writing a display system which you give to a browser. Browser makes a nice display, and then you can interact with that display. So it's a simple example here, SVG, and then here's some text, and here's some other text, and the result is this. This is exactly what that code looks like. Is it HTML? No, zero HTML, pure SVG. So if you want to, you could write a complete web system, lots of web pages, you add JavaScript, all of that stuff, purely using SVG. Totally, you could do that. Now, here's another example in case you think that's too simple, a bit more complex. Again, we're still staying with SVG for this. My web page is so awesome. It's got a nice gradient in the background. It's got a few circles, whatever you want. That is a bit more complex SVG example. And it can do things which is a bit of trouble if you try and do them in HTML, like these kind of circles and curves. You can do them in HTML, but not an easy situation. SVG is much better for that kind of thing. All right, so there is alternatives to HTML. Quick comparison, well, SVG, very focused on graphics. In fact, the G of SVG, scalable vector graphics. So it tells you it's really focusing on the graphics side of things. On the negative side, there aren't many libraries with SVG. So for example, you want to do mobile phone applications and so on, you wouldn't really choose SVG. Okay, you would go for the thing which has been around for like 30 odd years, HTML. Okay, it doesn't have such fantastic graphics as SVG. It really has a kind of fundamentally text approach to what it does. but it has millions of libraries, and you're trying to develop something advanced, mobile phone, multi-tablet kind of system, you really don't have too much choice, and you really have to go for HTML.